Hi, Circuspreneurs. This is your host, Shanae Stiletto, and this is a special solo episode of the podcast. And I wanted to put out an episode that speaks to the current situation around the Epstein files and the survivors of Epstein as a survivor of USA Gymnastics and as someone who survived the failures of USA Gymnastics. I know firsthand what happens when institutions don't have strong oversight. So, when I look at the Epstein files and the courage of the survivors coming forward, I'm not looking at the headlines. I'm looking at the systems, and those systems or lack of systems show up everywhere, including the circus and performing arts communities that we all work in, every single day. And, I stand with these survivors of Epstein and, the continued release of all of the files and holding the folks that were involved in this accountable. I know what it's like to fight so hard to want to see folks in positions of power that led to these horrific crimes happening held accountable, and how hard it is to exist in societies that want to make light of abuses of this nature, or environments that want to stay underregulated, like sport wanted to, and speaking to the entertainment world and the performing arts world and the circus world in terms of slowly kind of edging towards oversight and increased regulations and legislation and laws, which I believe so much in terms of policy shifts and guidelines that should be changed. And I'm not sure if any of you listened to my most recent episode with Rebecca Johansson. She is an intimacy coordinator represented by SAG-AFTRA, so she's the part of the union. She's a union intimacy coordinator, and she has an intimacy choreography or intimacy choreographers program that she's just started. And we discussed of the importance of utilizing different strategies of instituting reforms inside of the arts and entertainment industries in lieu of legislative shifts, which for me, legislative shifts should always be the goal. But whatever you can do to move the needle without a full, legislative shift, I think is a win. I don't think that is the ultimate win, but I do think that that is definitely something to strive for. I see the importance, or the important nature of incorporating intimacy coordinators and choreographers inside of the arts, and I have for a very long time. I've discussed that adaptation. Started that a few years ago with different intimacy coordinators. And this is, prior to their full involvement with SAG. But now we could have folks that are represented by unions involved in supporting the entertainment arts and performing arts and circus arts industries, which I think is a great thing, right? Getting a lot of eyes and ears on our industries with folks that have oversight by other environments and institutions that do have policy shifts and do have legislative shifts within their environments. Obviously, like union standards um, are something that we're also vying for as the Circus Arts Guild of America for the circus arts industry. And so that, environments don't have to fight to regulate themselves space to space to space. So that there can be some cohesive oversight for the industry in America. And then those, things can also too start to be oversights that are international standards, because we also need to continue to look at international standards. When I'm speaking about, different oversights and things, I mean, I'm obviously based in America, based in Las Vegas, and an American performer, but these are things that I feel like need to be international standards. Maybe there's easier access to grants and, some levels of reformation in international circus, but the international circus industry, even with, circus arts category recognition, that doesn't come with circus laws yet. Um, these spaces are now just starting to look in terms of like circus laws, and circus policies that will be effectuated by those governments. But, these are things that I have seen are needed all over the world in circus. And so again, back to, the Epstein survivors, again, I don't want to speak or say anything that sensationalizes these stories or my own story, my own personal experience. I did a small episode on P. Diddy, for example, as a prolific and career abuser that he was, again, looking at the similarities in my own experience as a survivor of USA Gymnastics, and then also to now speaking to the similarities in the Epstein cases and the Epstein survivors, which there are thousands of them, over the course of decades. And if you have not watched the documentary that was done, there's now, more than one, but the one that came out a few years ago, I mean, it's really stunning to go inside of, his ring of influence and everything he did to those victims in Florida, those young girls, and how he, set things up as, this very, big pyramid scheme of, younger girls recruiting younger girls. And, even listening to survivors like Lisa Phillips, who has been making the rounds, in media and doing a lot of really powerful interviews about her experience as a young model being taken advantage of and abused by Epstein, and being taken advantage of by her, some of them unsuspecting friends that were her same age, and how quickly her life shifted and how she was promised things that would help her career, and how she thought that these were people that, meant her well, and that now, things that she was, inspired to do in her career were now being, kind of harnessed by these people, all very similar to experiences that I had as a survivor of UC gymnastics, right? Where they start to utilize the things that you love and that, are things that all of your hopes and dreams are wrapped up inside of, and how they start to use those dreams as a way to get you to, do things that you don't want to do. And uh, I think that it's very important when we speak about our experiences where you make it very normal and real in terms of how easily it is for people like Epstein to abuse so many young girls and then to get away with it for so many years. And then also too, for the conspiratorial aspect to come into play so strongly that then it makes people think, oh, but this is like so grandiose and so out of this world. And it involved, again, all of these, very prominent and elite people. Very important to touch on that, obviously, to recognize how people in positions of power literally just do whatever they want. And I've seen that for years in the entertainment industry, and people that have a lot of wealth. They really just think that they do not exist in our society in the same way that you and I do. And the larger the resources, I mean, it just comes down to like, what can you ask for when you have a big budget for a show? I've done some really fascinating performances for folks that have these insane amounts of budgets where they want to spend, a few $1 million in one day. And what they ask for and what they want and what they think they can have access to is literally just unending. And so those are people that are not being abusive. They're just trying to, in their perspective, have a good time. And, placing that same perspective on abusers in this way that again are just operating on a different level. It's like people when you're performing and they're like, we want, to have like 300 performers in one day, performing in all these different capacities. It's just, it mirrors so many things within our industries. And then also to just seeing inside of that. But I think the other perspective that I wanted to touch on is how challenging and difficult it is to get justice as a survivor in these spaces of abuse and neglect, and society conspiring on behalf of these predators and these pedophiles and these prolific abusers, and how we don't take the abuse of children, you know, uh, serious enough, and how we also too have to start putting the abuse of children into all these different categories, as if that changes anything or makes anything, better, or I don't know. People just feel like they need to speak about these experiences in so many different ways. To me, is just very strange. As somebody who was abused, and you just wanting people to hear your story, make changes, and be held accountable. You want to see people, go to jail and go to prison. And I think it's sad, when you think about the Epstein case, how he, at this point in time, really the only person besides, of his co-conspirator that have gone to prison and have gone to jail, and how there's so many people that are a part of this. And again, it speaks to my experiences as a survivor of USA Gymnastics, and how few people, like, no one went to jail, no one went to prison for any of the things that happened to any of us, outside of that main person, which is what I'm talking about. And how I hope that we're able to see more of the abusers that were connected to Epstein, go to prison and go away. And, I was speaking also to recently to some individuals that, know about my career, know about my work, and they were asking me, they were like, there's a lot of trafficking in a way going on right now. They didn't use that word, but they were like, we see a lot of, things making it to the news recently about these scam jobs, and how, people are brought and flown over to different countries, and then their documents are confiscated, and then they are eventually um just like locked into a space where they have to do this job that they didn't think that they were going to do, and they're just literally trafficked and held prisoner and not getting paid, and can't leave, and don't have any means to escape. And they were like, we thought of you just because your industry sounds so vulnerable to things like this, where people just post whatever they want online to get people to respond to a job, and then they do fly you out. They were like, but have you heard of difficulties like this faced by people in your industry? And and I said, yes. I said, that is an issue in our industry for sure. I know, people that have walked into jobs that did not exist, then they don't have a flight back home, or they have a flight back home that has, they can't use that flight back home, and the details of the contract start changing per day, or they do the contract, and then the people that brought them out don't want to pay them, so they're like almost forced to fly back home without any money. And that, they've gone to different, spaces to get help. And, no one will help them in the country. And they can't get help from the embassy. And they really just have been trafficked and then released and sent back. And, this is just all making me think about, again, how our industry needs better protections and increased regulations and increased oversight, through policy and through laws on a local, state, federal level, and on an international circus and entertainment level as well, because we are all so vulnerable And with all of these cases that keep coming out, it's showing just how much more vulnerable we are because of social media, and how there's not enough checks and balances out there on posts that people can make, on castings, on auditions as well, on so many, on so many things where we can really just fall under the radar. And putting that in perspective for people, because when I was discussing this with some acquaintances, they were like, we never thought about it that way. That's totally the language that we would use, if you thought you were going to do a job in entertainment and then it just like didn't work out. And that's what a lot of people will just end up saying, like, oh, it just didn't work out. And it's like, hopefully you got out of there. Hopefully you were able to, get some protections and get out of there and get back home. But, there's so many different people that could be involved in keeping you in a job that you don't want to be in. Or, again, you are not in the position to say no to that job. And so you need to go anyway. And then you don't get paid, or you're like, maybe at least I'll get paid 20%. I really need this gig. It's not easy in our industry to work and to make money and to keep consistent employment, and to move and exist within so many different countries and cultures that can, no matter where you are, could take advantage of you. It's not even one specific space. I mean, you could be in one of the best countries that you think has a lot of systems and things in place and still, end up very, exploited. And that comes down to the lack of legislation and overall protections and information and education that we have in our industries, and why that needs to change. And we've done so much in the space around youth and Olympic sport. And we definitely need to continue to make those gains, in arts and entertainment, so that we don't have to keep doing spot treatments or all of this incremental from space to space to space and hoping that other environments will take that on, even though that is very, very, very positive as well. Because I have been, again, through the work of the Circus Arts Guild of America, speaking in so many environments, because I do hope that, individual spaces will make these changes on their own and then influence other spaces to do the same thing. And then use that to show the policymakers, hey, our industry is making these changes on their own, but we could really use your support in terms of a legislative ask. And showing them that we are willing and we're all moving in the same direction is very important to harness their support. It does work and it does matter. And so, in coming back to my initial, you know, reflections on these survivors of Epstein and supporting them. And I hope that you're reaching out to your representatives and telling them to support the release of all of the files. And then looking into other ways that you can support survivors. We need so many voices, in and around exposing these rings and exposing these networks of, so that people like him don't continue to get sweetheart deals. And, for the folks that, again, haven't watched the documentary and listened to, the different interviews and the books that have been released now, in exposing these people, these high level people, which again, don't make them so high level, right? It's just like how it felt in USA Gymnastics. These are just people that are willing to throw whoever it takes under the bus, to protect their own personal interest. Don't make it so much of a conspiracy. It could be anybody. And in speaking again to the people that are the good ones, and how many of those people have not been brought to justice whatsoever. And that helped these things to go on for so long. And I say that so much in my episodes that I do as a survivor, because I really want people to get that it's not about focusing on that evil perpetrator, even those other evil perpetrators. It's the people that minimize, that detract, that distract, and that are supposed to be there as the good ones to make sure that you still do okay, right? We don't want everything to like fall apart for you, right? Like let those other ones take that on, because like, don't you take that on too. Like, those are the things that people should be worried about when people start talking to you like that, like, oh, you don't want to be the one takes on all the change, or you don't want to be the one that people like single out. If you feel like that is what you're starting to say to yourself, watch out, because it's it's the fact that there are so many people that talk like that things like this continue to go on because I heard it. I experienced it firsthand. You know, all the people that want you to keep your career, all the people that want you to shoot for your dreams, all your people that want you to do good in the next interview. You can start saying things, but wait until you're in a better position, right? I know people that didn't even get to that better position because there were other people that were seeking to get ahead of them, even in that way. Because so many people are running a game around you, and you don't know all the details, and you don't know how many workings and dealings people are making behind the scenes that you'll never be privy to. Even if you're holding back to get your chance to speak up, you may never get it because no one's going to let you in. So I think that, these are very difficult conversations to have. I always tell people it's not difficult for me to advocate for the circus arts industry because there's nothing harder than advocating for children that have been abused and been trafficked and been exploited for the personal gain of adults and people in positions of power. No one wants to talk about the sexual abuse of children. I am, I'm just proud of the survivors of Epstein and proud that, this conversation is a national conversation again, once again. But how many of these horrific and terrible cases do we need to have before we make long lasting and increased reforms, especially around environments that do not have a lot of eyes and ears on them? So people continue to speak out, they continue to do what they can in terms of advocacy, but voices need to continue to be loud to make sure that our representatives know that we care about holding people accountable for the abuses that they inflict against children. Against children. I know it's hard to imagine certain atrocities just because you see people as adults now. And, people start playing with ages. Oh, they weren't that young. Oh, they were old enough to know better. Oh, they were this and they were that. Apologizing for abusers is very sad, but I've heard it for years. So I am undeterred. I know what that feels like. I know what that looks like. And hopefully within yourself, you are not using that as a reason to not speak up or say something, especially if you're in an environment right now that you feel like could really use a voice and, get people moving in a direction that is conducive, that is constructive, and that is reformative in a legislative or lawful manner because it is possible. We've done it, we're doing it, and there are people that are really putting their own personal safety and things on the line to change the way that we allow systems of abuse to get away with so many crimes for so many years and so much neglect. And, especially with those that are vulnerable within society, you never know when you're going to end up in a vulnerable demographic in your life, right? You could be somebody, you know, I have, a friend that is involved in, the big case against the FBI and in harassment around that. And that's a case that has gone public and they're doing more reforms around that. So, I mean, these are adult women that were getting a job with the FBI and became vulnerable demographic. So, in reminding you, you never know when you're going to be in a vulnerable demographic. You don't. Or in a demographic that people don't think is going to be vulnerable to being exploited or being abused. So I think it's, again, important that we continue to rally around these conversations. As a survivor of USA Gymnastics and as somebody that is in, that does advocacy around this all the time and hears the stories of survivors and victims, and then again, who gets to watch and see how much of these experiences mirror my own. And so for me, they are not conspiracies, they're not conspiracy theories. They are very real and they are perpetrated by very real, very normal people or people that just have positions of power, which again, they just exploit those positions. And it happens in so many different forms and in so many different ways. And, again, devising new pathways forward is what we need to continue to do to make sure that those of us that are in these spaces use our voices constructively and speak for those that maybe feel like they cannot speak for themselves, but you are more powerful than you think. And that is why I do the podcast. And that is what I hope the work of the podcast continues um, to support in terms of making our industry in the circus, entertainment, and the arts safer, more equitable, more accessible, but with safeguards in place, because just increasing accessibility but not increasing safeguards, I think is only opening us up to even more exploitation as an industry and as a community, and as spaces that are supposed to be nurturing and supportive. And again, equitable spaces of employment, right? Because not every space you're going to go into is going to be maybe the most nurturing when you're an employee, but it should be the most equitable space that it can be, so that you can do your job on the level that you would like to do it on, and having those safeguards in place so that you can do the job that you're qualified for. And I think that's what we all just want to be able to do. So thank you so much for listening to this solo episode of the Circuspreneur Podcast. I'm your host, Shanae Stiletto. Thank you to our sponsor, stagelink.com. And until next time, everyone, please stay safe and stay healthy. And remember to contact your reps.